In this lecture, we are going to properly save our block in the database. As it stands, the block is being saved incorrectly. For comparison, let's try adding a paragraph block to the experimental page. So far, nothing seems off, right? It may not look like it, but both blocks will be saved differently. To understand why, let's take a look at the output of both blocks. From the Gutenberg editor, open the block list sidebar. Next, select both blocks. We are going to copy them to our clipboard. If you were to paste these blocks into your code editor, you might see something that looks like this. Notice the difference between them? Our block is self-closing. It does not have content. Inside the comments, the content attribute has been added. By default, Gutenberg will store attribute data from within the comment. The same is not true for the paragraph block. Unlike our block, the paragraph block has content. It is not self-closing. So why is Gutenberg treating our block differently? WordPress supports two types of rendering methods. We can use client-side rendering or server-side rendering. Both methods have their pros and cons. Client-side rendering is when a block's final output is created with JavaScript. The paragraph block is an example of client-side rendering. The final output of the block is saved in the database. Server-side rendering is when a block's final output is created with PHP. The block's content is never saved in the database. Instead, a placeholder will be saved by Gutenberg. This placeholder will be replaced by the return value of a PHP function for handling the final output. In this course, we are going to explore both options. For starters, let's try creating a block with client-side rendering. It's the simpler solution. After looking at both approaches, we will dive deeper into the differences. WordPress is assuming our block is rendered with the server. We can switch to client-side rendering by adding a function to the block's configuration object. In your editor, open the index.js file. Inside the object, add a function called save. The save function is an alternative function for creating a component for our block. It may sound strange, but WordPress allows us to create two functions for creating a component. They both play different roles. The edit function will create a component for editing the block, whereas the save function will create a component saved in the database. If you think about it, the user doesn't need to see the toolbars or forms that come with a block. Instead, these elements should be presented to the editor. On the front end of WordPress, visitors only care about the content. To reduce visual clutter, WordPress has two functions for creating the same block. The edit function is for the Gutenberg editor. The save function is for the front end. By pressing publish or update on the Gutenberg editor, the save function gets executed. Whatever is returned by our function will be saved in the database. Let's try updating our save function to return the content. Inside the save function, destructure the props argument for the attributes object. The save function is provided with the same props object as the edit function. We can access the same data. Next, let's destructure the attributes object for the content attribute. Lastly, we are going to return the richText.content component. It may seem strange to render this component. After all, our block is rendering an h2 tag with editable text. However, the rich text component is capable of adding formatting to the text. For example, we can apply line breaks, bolden text, or italicized text. This means that additional HTML and CSS will get created. To completely benefit from this component, we must return the same component. However, we do not want the text to be editable on the front end. Luckily, the rich text component has a variation called content. The purpose of the content component is to return the same content as the rich text component without the feature of editing the text. It's perfectly safe to use in our save function. The properties for this component are the same as the rich text component. Let's set the tag name prop to h2. Next, the value prop can be set to the content attribute. Our block is ready. Let's double check by verifying the output of the block in the Gutenberg editor. Refresh the experimental page. If the block was added to the page, it may be broken. That's to be expected. As I said before, if you run across this error after updating your component, the block must be re-added to the page. WordPress has a hard time keeping track of changes. I'm going to add the fancy header and paragraph blocks to the page. Next, let's check out the contents of both blocks. You can copy the blocks from the sidebar by selecting them both. If you were to view the code copied to your clipboard, this is what you should see. Unlike last time, the fancy header block is not self-closing. It has content. The content saved in the database will be loaded on the front end. We can verify the content by viewing the page on the front end. As you can see, the content saved in the database will be rendered on the browser. Client-side rendering allows WordPress to render content immediately. This is the main benefit of client-side rendering. The Gutenberg editor will process the block on the front end. The final output of the block is saved in the database. Therefore, WordPress does not need to worry about rendering the block with PHP. It can be immediately rendered on the browser without taking extra steps. Let's continue working on our block in the following lecture.